The butter pat melted on Oberleutnant Klaus Behren's trembling fingers. He froze. Mid-line in the Camp McCain mess hall, tears hit first, hot, unstoppable, dripping onto the tray. Shoulders shaking, chest heaving like he'd taken shrapnel. Butter, real butter, golden, stacked in towers on every table, wax-wrapped, sweating in Mississippi heat. Dozens, hundreds, for prisoners. Back in Tunisia, he'd watched his squadron mechanic trade a wedding ring for 2 eggs. Men beating each other bloody over half a potato in the sand. Rancid margarine cut with chalk. That was luxury. Propaganda swore America starved, blockaded into collapse. But here. This. 5 pats balanced in his numb palm, more than his entire Luftwaffe base saw in a month. He spread it on white bread, bit down, broke completely. What if the enemy defeated you? With kindness. The hamburger grease was still warm on Oberleutnant Klaus Behren's fingers when he first saw them. Butter pats, stacked like ammunition on every table in the Camp McCain mess hall. Golden squares wrapped in wax paper, dozens of them, just sitting there in the Mississippi heat. September 1943, and the Americans were leaving butter out in towers. For prisoners. Klaus stopped moving. The line of German POWs backed up behind him. "Move along, Lieutenant," the American guard said, not unkindly. Klaus couldn't. His brain was doing mathematics it didn't want to complete. He counted 12 pats on the nearest table. 8 tables visible from where he stood. 96 pats of butter in one room. More butter than his entire Luftwaffe squadron, 32 pilots, 60 ground crew, had received in a month before his Messerschmitt went down over Tunisia. The propaganda broadcasts had been clear. America was starving. Britain was weeks from collapse. The Atlantic blockade worked. Victory was inevitable. His hands started shaking. "You okay, son?" The guard again, closer now. Klaus reached out, took 1 pat, then another. His fingers felt numb. 3, 4, 5 pats of butter balanced in his palm like they might disappear. Someone behind him whispered in German, "Is it real?" He carried his tray, real beef, actual potatoes, the 5 butter pats, to a table and sat. 200 men in Luftwaffe gray and Wehrmacht green watched him. Nobody spoke. The Americans had only started allowing them to eat together last week, after the commandant decided they weren't a security risk. 200 prisoners packed into one room for the first time since capture. Klaus picked up his knife. Unwrapped the first butter pat. The smell hit him. Sweet? Rich? Nothing like the rancid margarine cut with chalk dust they'd gotten in North Africa. Nothing like the gray spread that came in tins stamped with lies about alpine dairy farms. He spread it on the white bread. Actual white bread, soft enough to compress under the knife. Took a bite. His chest tightened. The taste was clean, pure, impossible. Another bite. The bread dissolved on his tongue. He spread another pat, hands moving automatically while his mind tried to reconcile 3 years of certainty with the evidence melting in his mouth. Another slice, another pat. The tears came without warning. Klaus bent over his mashed potatoes, real potatoes with actual butter pooling in the center, and his shoulders started shaking. He couldn't stop, couldn't breathe right. Kept spreading butter on bread with trembling fingers, kept eating through tears that dripped onto the tray. Slice after slice, pat after pat. 7 pieces of bread before he could make his throat work. The mess hall had gone completely silent. 200 German prisoners watching an officer cry into American food. The guards stood frozen at their posts, uncertain what protocol covered this. Klaus wiped his face with a cloth napkin. Not paper, actual cloth, and looked up at the nearest POW, a young Gefreiter who couldn't have been more than 19. "We were told they were starving," Klaus said in German. His voice cracked. "We bombed their supply lines for 3 years because command said they were desperate." The kid stared at the butter towers. "They have so much," Klaus continued. "They're giving it to us, to prisoners, more than we fed our own pilots." An American guard later wrote in his incident report, filing it with the camp commandant, "German officer, Behrens, Klaus, lieutenant rank, experienced emotional episode during evening mess. Subject consumed 7 slices of bread with butter, crying throughout. No security threat assessed. Recommend monitoring for psychological distress. Notable: subject appeared disturbed by quantity of rations provided rather than quality. Other POWs observed in silence, no interventions required." What the report didn't capture was the sound of 200 men sitting with full trays, staring at food they'd been told didn't exist, each one doing the same terrible math. Klaus looked at the butter pat still in his hand. The 6th one. He'd taken 5 and somehow grabbed another without noticing. A Hauptmann 3 seats down, older, iron cross visible on his jacket, spoke quietly. "How long have they had this much?" Nobody answered. The American guard who'd told Klaus to move along stood near the wall, watching. Young guy, maybe 22, farm-fed thickness to his shoulders. He caught Klaus looking and gave a small shrug like he didn't understand what the fuss was about. That was worse somehow, the casualness. Butter towers were normal to him. This abundance was just Thursday. Klaus wrapped the 6th butter pat in his napkin, slipped it into his pocket like contraband. He'd seen men in his squadron beat each other over half a potato, watched ground crew steal food from the injured. 3 months before his capture, a mechanic named Friedrich had traded his wedding ring for 2 eggs, and here sat enough butter to buy a car back home. What else did they lie about? The question came from somewhere in the middle of the room. Klaus couldn't see who asked. The Hauptmann with the iron cross set down his fork, hadn't taken a bite yet, just stared at his tray like it might explain itself. A younger voice, barely a whisper, "If they lied about the food." Nobody finished that sentence. Didn't need to. You could see it spreading through the room, that same mathematical impossibility. If America had this much to spare for prisoners, what else was different? If the propaganda was wrong about butter, what about the war, the blockade, the inevitable victory? Klaus stood up, legs unsteady, carried his tray to the collection window. The butter wrapper crinkled in his pocket as he walked. Behind him, 200 men started eating, slowly at first, then faster. The sound of forks on metal trays filled the silence. Someone laughed, high and broken. Someone else told him to shut up in German. Klaus stepped outside into the Mississippi heat. Cicadas screamed in the pine trees surrounding the camp. The fence wire gleamed in the sunset. Guard towers stood at each corner, bored Americans visible in silhouette. He pulled the butter pat from his pocket, unwrapped it. The wax paper stuck to his sweating palm. Just butter, golden and soft in the heat. Probably cost the Americans 5 cents. It had cost Klaus everything he'd believed for 3 years. He stood there until the butter melted completely, running between his fingers onto the red dirt, while behind him in the mess hall, 200 German prisoners discovered that hunger could be satisfied, but certainty, once broken, stayed shattered. Werner Todt reached for the bottle before his brain could stop him. The Red Cross volunteer, a plump woman with gray curls and a Kansas accent, smiled as she placed it in his palm. Cold. Impossibly cold. Brown glass beaded with condensation that wet his fingers. He'd been at Camp Alva 3 weeks since Kasserine Pass, still wearing the same suspicion he'd carried across the Atlantic. "Go on, honey," the woman said. "First one's free." Werner spoke enough English to understand the trap. Nothing was free. Not from Americans. Not from anyone. He turned the bottle, reading the white script against dark glass. Coca-Cola. He'd seen the propaganda posters back home. Jewish financiers poisoning German youth with decadent beverages. Capitalist corruption in liquid form. He twisted the cap. It hissed. The first sip hit his tongue like electricity. Sugar. Actual sugar. Not saccharin or honey substitute or the chemical sweetness of ersatz cola the party distributed. Real cane sugar, carbonated, cold enough to hurt his teeth. The fizz burned his throat. He took another pull. then another, and the bottle was half empty before he lowered it. "This is sugar," he said, his English fractured by shock. He held the bottle toward the volunteer like evidence. "Real sugar, in a drink?" She laughed, not mockingly, but genuinely pleased. "Well, sure, sweetie, you can buy 6 more if you want. Everyone gets canteen tokens on Fridays." Werner's hand started shaking. He set the bottle down on the wooden counter before he dropped it. Behind him, other POWs were collecting their rations: cigarettes, candy bars, soap. Luxury items casually distributed like camp bread. His mind kept trying to reconcile the mathematics. Sugar was rationed in Germany before the war started. By 1941, children got perhaps 2 kilograms yearly. Officers like him received marginally better allotment. This bottle probably contained a month's worth, just sitting in a cooler, for prisoners. "How long?" he asked. "How long what, dear?" "This." He gestured at the Coca-Cola. "How long has this existed?" The woman tilted her head. "Oh, Coke? Goodness, since the 1880s, I think. My grandfather used to drink it." 60 years. Werner grabbed his tokens, small metal discs stamped with POW canteen, and bought 12 bottles. The volunteer helped him load them into a canvas bag, still smiling, still treating him like a customer instead of an enemy. He walked back to Barracks 7 in the Oklahoma heat, the bag clinking with each step, his mind churning through propaganda he'd memorized in Hitler Youth training. America starves while its Jewish elite hoard wealth. The Western democracies collapse from their own decadence. Germany's discipline will outlast their chaos. He set the bag on his bunk. The other men were out at work detail. He opened the first bottle and drank it standing up, counting the swallows. 8. He opened the second. The third. By the 5th bottle his stomach hurt. By the 8th he felt sick. By the 12th he was sitting on the floor between bunks, surrounded by empty brown glass, staring at nothing. The others found him there after dinner. "Todd, you all right?" Corporal Messner crouched beside him. "Jesus, how much of that did you drink?" Werner gestured at the bottles. 12 soldiers gathered around, staring at the display like it was evidence of madness. "I need to speak to the commandant," Werner said. They tried to talk him down. Messner thought he'd cracked. Private Vogel suggested the sugar had made him ill, but Werner pushed past them, walked across the compound in the dying light, and stood outside the commandant's office until Major Patterson emerged for evening rounds. "Son, you need something?" Werner's English failed him. He stood there, mouth open, trying to arrange words for a question that didn't make sense. Finally, "The Coca-Cola. How long?" Patterson studied him with the patient expression Americans seem to specialize in. "Since the 1880s, son. Said that already, didn't she?" 60 years, Werner repeated in German, then switched back. "You had this. For 60 years. Give or take. Why?" "We were told." Werner stopped, started again. "I was told America was weak, starving, rationing everything for war, but you put sugar in bottles, for children." Patterson nodded slowly. "We put sugar in a lot of things, soldier. Coffee, candy, cereal. It's just sugar. Just sugar." Werner walked back to Barracks 7. The men were waiting, the 12 bottles arranged on his footlocker like some kind of shrine. He stood at the end of the aisle where everyone could see him. 60 years, he said in German. "They've had this for 60 years. While we were rationing grain for the party, they were putting sugar in bottles and giving it to children." Silence. "I drank 12 today," Werner continued. 12. I could buy 12 more tomorrow if I wanted. They don't care. They have enough to give it to us, to prisoners." Private Becker spoke carefully. "Maybe it's propaganda. Maybe they're only doing this to confuse us." "For 60 years, Werner's voice cracked. "They planned this for 60 years? Before the party even existed?" No one answered. "I'm going to the chaplain," Corporal Messner said quietly. I need to talk to someone." "I'll come," Vogel added. By the end of the week, 3 men had requested religious counseling. Not for faith, for defection paperwork. The chaplain's office logged the meetings as routine spiritual care, but the American intelligence officers noticed. You didn't suddenly need spiritual guidance after drinking Coca-Cola, unless something deeper had cracked. Werner kept all 12 bottles, lined them up on the windowsill of Barracks 7, where the evening light turned the glass amber. Other prisoners started bringing their empties, evidence, talismans, proof of something they couldn't quite name. The bottles accumulated. 20, 30, 50. An American guard walking past the barracks at night saw them glinting in the darkness and filed a report. POWs collecting Coca-Cola bottles, uncertain of significance. Recommend monitoring for escape materials. But they weren't making weapons. They were building a museum of their own deception. Werner sat on his bunk 3 months later when news came through about the Ardennes offensive. Germany's last desperate push. His first thought wasn't victory or fear or patriotic fervor. His first thought was, they're still dying for this. He picked up one of the bottles, held it to the light. Empty, but still bearing the white script that promised refreshment, that suggested abundance, that represented 60 years of casual prosperity while he'd been taught to worship scarcity as strength. The bottle felt heavier than it should. The baseball was still warm from the Colorado sun when Sergeant Kowalski pressed it into Rolf's palm. "Fingers on the seams," Kowalski said, demonstrating. "Like this." Gefreiter Rolf Niedermeyer stood on the pitcher's mound at Camp Trinidad, May 1944, trying to understand why Americans cared so much about throwing a ball. Back in Aachen, he'd thrown grenades. Now, this Ami wanted him to throw leather and stitching at a wooden stick. 6 weeks earlier, the Americans had pulled him from the labor detail because he was tall. That's it. Just tall. In the Wehrmacht, being tall meant carrying the MG-42. Here, it meant this, standing on dirt while a Chicago sergeant tried teaching him something called a fastball. "Don't think," Kowalski said. "Just throw." Rolf threw. The ball sailed past the catcher and hit the fence. "Good arm," Kowalski grinned. "Terrible aim. Again." They practiced every afternoon. The other POWs watched from the barracks windows, making jokes about their Panzer Grenadier playing children's games. Rolf didn't care. For 1 hour each day, nobody shot at him. Nobody screamed. Nobody died. The ball fit his hand better each time. By late May, Kowalski entered him in a real game, Camp Trinidad POWs versus the local Colorado town team, civilian Americans. The people Rolf had been trained to see as mongrel enemies of the Reich. The stands filled with townspeople carrying lemonade and wearing straw hats against the sun. Women, children, old men. They sat on wooden bleachers like this was normal, like watching Germans play baseball was something people did on Saturday afternoons. Rolf's hands shook as he warmed up. "You got this," Kowalski said from the dugout. "Remember, fingers on the seams." The first batter stepped up. American civilian, maybe 30, wearing a plaid shirt. He nodded at Rolf, actually nodded, like they were equals. Rolf threw. The ball cracked into the catcher's mitt. Strike one. The crowd murmured. Rolf's heartbeat hammered in his ears. He threw again. Strike two. The batter choked up on his grip. Serious now. Rolf could see Kowalski grinning in the dugout, giving him the signal they'd practiced. Third throw. The batter swung and missed. The crowd erupted. Rolf froze. They were clapping. Americans were clapping for him. Standing up, whistling. A woman in the front row waved a handkerchief. "That's one," Kowalski shouted. "Two more." The next batter struck out on 4 pitches. Then the third went down swinging. The entire crowd stood and roared. Rolf walked off the mound in a daze. His teammates, German POWs he barely knew, slapped his back, laughed, celebrated. In that moment, the war didn't exist. Just this field, this game, this impossible sound of enemy civilians cheering his name. A woman approached the fence, blonde, maybe 40, holding a pitcher of lemonade. "Son," she called out in English, "you thirsty?" Rolf looked at the guards. They nodded. She poured him a glass through the chain link. Her hand didn't shake. She smiled like she'd served lemonade to German soldiers 1,000 times. "Good pitching," she said. Rolf drank. Real lemons, real sugar, cold from ice. "Thank you," he managed in broken English. Then the children came. 5 of them, maybe 8 or 9 years old, running up with baseballs and scraps of paper. One kid held out a ball and a pencil. "Can you sign it?" the kid asked. "My dad says you throw heat." Rolf stared at the baseball, at these American children approaching him without fear, without supervision, their parents just watching from the stands, unconcerned that their kids were asking a Wehrmacht soldier for his autograph. "I don't," Rolf started. "Just sign it," Kowalski translated, appearing beside him. "Make the kid happy." R. Rolf took the ball, wrote his name in German script. The kid's face lit up like Christmas. "Thanks, mister." 4 more kids pushed forward. Rolf signed baseballs, programs, even a baseball card someone's brother had drawn of him. One girl asked him how to say fastball in German. He told her Schnellball, and she practiced it, laughing when she got the pronunciation wrong. Their parents watched and smiled. That night, back in the barracks, Rolf couldn't sleep. He pulled out the contraband diary he'd hidden in his mattress, a violation that could mean solitary, but he needed to write this down before he forgot how it felt. The words came in German, shaking across the page. "How do you make war on people who cheer for their enemy?" Today, I struck out 3 Americans and their families celebrated. A woman gave me lemonade. Children asked for my autograph like I was someone worth remembering. Not a monster, not a threat, just a man who could throw a ball. He paused, pencil hovering over paper. They brought their children to me. Let them stand close enough to touch. What kind of enemy does that? What kind of enemy trusts us with their sons and daughters while our government burns cities? Another pause. His hand cramped. I threw a ball and Americans celebrated like I was one of them, like nationality didn't matter, like the war was just something happening far away to other people. I don't understand what I'm defending anymore. I don't understand what we're supposed to hate about people who do this. He closed the diary and shoved it back into the mattress springs. Through the window, he could see the baseball field under moonlight, the pitcher's mound where he'd stood, the fence where the woman had served lemonade, the spot where children had asked him to sign their treasures. Rolf thought about his brother Georg, still fighting on the Eastern Front, about his mother in Aachen, probably eating potato soup for the 3rd time that week, about the Führer's speeches promising victory while America had enough abundance to waste ice on lemonade for prisoners. He thought about the standing ovation, and for the first time since his capture, Rolf wasn't sure which side was supposed to win. The package arrived during evening mail call, a cardboard box tied with string that looked like it had traveled halfway around the world. Which it had. Stabsgefreiter Lena Hartwig's name was printed in careful English on the label, care of the American Red Cross. She'd been squinting at distant objects for 8 months now. Ever since the glasses shattered during her capture near Tunisia, a guard's rifle butt, not meant for her, catching her face during the chaos. Everything beyond 10 feet existed, in soft blur. She navigated Camp Hearn's Texas dust by memory and proximity, eyes burning by evening. The other women in Barracks 14 gathered around as Lena cut the string. Her hands shook. Packages meant complications, questions. What did they want in return? Inside, wool socks, still soft. A Whitman's sampler chocolate box, the yellow wrapper obscene in its cheerfulness. A mystery novel in German. Someone had actually sourced German literature. And underneath, wrapped in tissue paper, a hard case. Lena opened it. Froze. Eyeglasses. Wire-rimmed. The exact style she'd worn. "Try them," Frida Volkmann said from behind her shoulder. "What if they're wrong?" Lena lifted them with both hands like they might dissolve. Put them on. The world snapped into focus. Sharp corners on the barracks doorframe. individual strands in Frida's blonde braid, the grain pattern in the wooden floorboards 20 feet away. She could see the guard tower clearly through the window, the American soldier's face, the texture of the sandbags, everything. She started laughing, then crying, then laughing again, hands pressed to her face. "Lena?" Frida grabbed her shoulders. "What's wrong?" "I can see." The words came out strangled. "I can see the clock on the wall. It's 7:43. I can read it from here." The other women stared. One of them picked up the empty case, found the paperwork inside. "It lists your prescription. From your intake medical examination." Lena ripped the glasses off, marched across the compound to the administrative building. The package clutched against her chest. The world blessedly sharp for the first time since Africa. Guards opened doors without question. She found Colonel Hayes in his office, reviewing paperwork under a desk lamp. "This is a mistake," she said in English, dropping the box on his desk. Hayes looked up, saw the glasses on her face, smiled. "No mistake, soldier. Your prescription was in your intake file." "But I'm a prisoner." "You're also damn near blind. Can't have you walking into walls. Safety hazard." Lena's voice rose. "You accessed my medical records. You found my exact prescription. You manufactured these, for free, for an enemy." Hayes set down his pen. "Miss Hartwig, we have standards for how prisoners are treated. The Geneva Convention requires adequate medical care. Poor vision qualifies. My own Luftwaffe couldn't spare the glass." The admission came out raw. "After my glasses broke, I submitted 3 requisition forms, all denied, material shortage, and you just make them?" "We have the capacity." Hayes gestured at the box. "The Red Cross handles most of it. Chocolates from Pennsylvania, socks from a church group in Vermont. Novel came through a German-American cultural center in New York. They specifically requested we provide reading material to POWs." Lena sank into the chair across from him. The room had details she'd never noticed. A photograph of Hayes' family on the desk, wife, 3 kids, a coffee stain on the corner of a map, dust motes in the lamplight, each one visible. "What kind of enemy does this?" Her voice cracked. Hayes stood, poured water from a pitcher into 2 glasses, handed her one. "The kind that wins wars by being better, not worse. You can't exactly claim the moral high ground while denying medical care to prisoners, can you?" She drank. Cold water, clean. "You gave me glasses so I could see to escape. If you want to try escaping Camp Hearn, Texas, into the middle of rattlesnake country in December, be my guest. You'd last 3 hours." He sat back down. "Those glasses are so you can work safely in the sewing detail, so you can read without headaches, so you can be a functional human being while you're here. That's it." Lena touched the frames. Wire, not even military-grade material. Something thin and precise and completely unnecessary for a prisoner who might be repatriated in months. "We were told Americans were Jewish-controlled subhumans who lived in chaos." The words felt like treason. "That you barely had food for your own people. That Britain was starving. That we were saving civilization from your corruption." Hayes picked up a chocolate from the Whitman sampler she'd brought, ate it. "And now you're sitting in my office wearing American-made prescription eyeglasses, arguing with me about why we're not terrible enough." "Yes. That's called cognitive dissonance. Uncomfortable, isn't it?" Lena looked at the family photograph again, now visible in perfect detail. Hayes's youngest daughter couldn't have been more than 6. Blonde pigtails, missing front tooth. She thought of her own niece in Stuttgart. Wondered if she still had enough to eat. If the rationing had gotten worse. If anyone was making her eyeglasses when hers broke. "I don't understand your war," she said quietly. "Nobody does. That's kind of the problem." Hayes stood. "Get some rest, Miss Hartwig. Enjoy the chocolate. I'll see you at roll call tomorrow." She walked back to Barracks 14 in the December dark, everything crystalline. Stars overhead sharp as pins. The barracks number painted on the door perfectly legible from 50 feet away. Her depth perception working again, the ground solid under her boots instead of vaguely approximated. Frida was waiting on her bunk. "Well," He said it's standard medical care. Lena sat down heavily. Like it's normal to give prisoners prescription eyeglasses. Like his country just makes these because someone might need them. Did you tell him about the requisitions you filed? The ones denied? Yes. What did he say? That they have the capacity. Lena opened the Whitman sampler. The chocolate inside was arranged in perfect rows, each piece a different shape. She selected one randomly, bit into it. Caramel flooded her mouth. Real sugar, the kind of sweetness that had disappeared from Germany 2 years ago. She ate 3 more pieces, then stopped, guilty. My mother hasn't had chocolate since 1942, she said. My niece asked what it tastes like last Christmas. She's 7, doesn't remember the taste of chocolate. And I'm sitting here eating American candy while wearing American glasses that work better than anything I could get in Berlin, even before the war. Frida took a piece, closed her eyes at the taste. Do you think they're lying about the camps? The question landed like a grenade in the quiet barracks. The newsreels? Lena adjusted the glasses. I don't know. Part of me wants to say it's propaganda, that they're exaggerating, making us look worse than we are. And the other part? Lena thought of the requisition forms. 3 denials for glasses while resources went elsewhere, while material poured into something, while the Reich prioritized efficiency and racial purity and conquest over basic medical care for its own soldiers. The other part remembers that they wouldn't spare glass for my eyes. She looked at Frida directly, seeing her friend's face in perfect detail for the first time since Africa. But they built something with those resources. All that steel and concrete and organization, they built something. That night, she wrote a letter home by lamplight, words finely legible on the page instead of blurred approximations. She knew the censors would read it before her mother did. Let them. They gave me the gift of sight while my own government couldn't spare the glass. I don't know what this means about who we are or what we're fighting for, but I know I can see now. I can see everything clearly. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe I wasn't supposed to see this clearly. Maybe none of us were. She signed it, folded it, left it for morning collection. Through the window, she could see the guard tower, the American soldier up top, the Christmas lights someone had strung across the administrative building, tiny and precise and completely unnecessary. Everything sharp, everything visible, everything terrifying in its clarity. The projectionist threaded the film while 800 German POWs filed into Camp McCain's converted recreation hall. Klaus Behrens sat 3 rows back, flanked by Werner Todt and Rolf Niedermeyer. January rain hammered the tin roof like static. The lights died. Grainy footage flickered onto the screen. British soldiers walking through gates. A sign in German, Arbeit macht frei. Klaus recognized Bergen-Belsen from the newsreel header. Then the bodies appeared, stacked like cordwood, skeletal limbs jutting at impossible angles, British bulldozers pushing masses of corpses into pits while stick-thin survivors watched with hollow eyes. The camera lingered on a child's face, mouth frozen open, ribs visible through translucent skin. Someone in the back row vomited. The sound echoed in the silence. The footage switched to Majdanek, mountains of shoes, warehouses filled with human hair. A brick building with iron doors and the translator's voice crackled through speakers. Gas chamber, capacity, 300 persons. Klaus's hands gripped the wooden seat. His knuckles went white. Next to him, Werner stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight Klaus could see the muscle jumping. On Klaus's other side, Rolf had his eyes closed, shoulders shaking. The newsreel continued. More camps. Dachau, Buchenwald. Each worse than the last. American soldiers forcing German civilians to walk through the camps, to witness what had been built in their names. Women covering their mouths. Men turning away. A mayor and his wife found hanged in their home that night rather than face what they'd seen. Klaus thought about the butter, the stacks of golden pats he'd sobbed over 4 months ago. While he'd been spreading butter on white bread in Mississippi, this had been happening. The footage showed a warehouse filled with prosthetic limbs, gold teeth pried from mouths, a register documenting arrivals and special treatment. The numbers scrolled past. Thousands, tens of thousands, millions. Werner made a sound like choking. Klaus stood up. 800 heads turned. The newsreel kept playing behind him, casting shadows across his face. He walked to the front of the auditorium, boots echoing on wooden floorboards. The American guards tensed, but didn't move. Colonel Hayes stood in the back corner, arms crossed, watching. Klaus turned to face the assembled prisoners. Germans in faded uniforms, Luftwaffe gray, Wehrmacht green, Kriegsmarine blue. Men who'd believed, men who'd fought, men who'd lost. "Ich muss sprechen," Klaus said. His voice cracked. "I need to speak." The American translator stepped forward. Klaus continued in German. Each sentence echoed in English for the guards. "I spent 3 years in the Luftwaffe, flew missions over Britain, France, North Africa. I bombed cities because my commanding officers told me we were saving Western civilization from Jewish Bolshevism. I believed them." Behind him, footage showed more bodies. The translator's voice remained steady. "I believed we were the Herrenvolk, superior, destined to rule. I believed the enemy was subhuman, degenerate, weak." Klaus's hands shook. He pressed them flat against his thighs. "Then my plane was shot down over Tunisia. I was captured, brought here to Mississippi. And you know what the Americans did?" Someone in the third row, a Feldwebel Klaus recognized from the mess hall, wiped his eyes. "They gave me butter." Klaus's voice rose. "More butter in one meal than my entire air base received in a month. They gave Werner 12 bottles of Coca-Cola made with real sugar while our children went without bread. They taught Rolf to play baseball and Americans cheered for him. For a German prisoner. They gave Lena Hartwig prescription eyeglasses so she could see, even though she's the enemy." The newsreel switched to footage of children behind barbed wire, tiny hands gripping the fence. Eyes too large for their faces. Klaus pointed at the screen without turning around. "And while they did that, while they treated us like humans, like we had worth, we were building that." His arm trembled, extended toward the images of death. "I don't know who ordered it. I don't know who knew, but I know I can't pretend anymore. I can't say I was just following orders when the Americans showed me what actual humanity looks like. When they gave me more kindness as their prisoner than my own government gave its citizens." Klaus's voice broke completely. "I bombed their cities. I killed their sons. And they gave me butter and white bread and tried to make sure I had enough to eat." The rain hammered harder. The newsreel showed British soldiers weeping as they carried bodies on stretchers. Medics trying to save survivors too far gone to save. "I don't know what happens when this war ends. I don't know what Germany becomes. But I know I can't go back and defend this. I can't stand at attention and say I served with honor when this is what I served." Klaus looked at Werner, at Rolf, at faces he'd shared mess halls with, baseball fields with, midnight conversations about home. "They defeated us," Klaus whispered. But the microphone caught it, sent it through the speakers. "Not with bombs, not with tanks. They defeated us with hamburgers and Coca-Cola and prescription eyeglasses and kindness. And somehow, that's more devastating than any weapon." He sat down in the front row, put his face in his hands. 800 German POWs sat in absolute silence. On screen, bulldozers pushed more bodies into mass graves. The mechanical grinding mixed with rain on the roof. Someone started crying. Then another. Then a dozen men at once. Rolf leaned forward from his seat, gripped Klaus's shoulder. Didn't say anything, just held on. Werner stared at the screen, tears running down his face, lips moving silently. Klaus realized he was counting bodies, trying to make the numbers real. The newsreel ended. The screen went white. The projector clicked off. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, nodded to the guards. "Dismissed. Return to your barracks." Nobody moved. I said, "Dismissed." Slowly, 800 men stood. filed out into the Mississippi rain. Klaus walked like his legs belonged to someone else. The butter he'd pocketed 4 months ago seemed like a relic from another life, from before he'd known what the butter had been bought with. In Barracks 7, men sat on bunks without speaking. Someone had collected the Coca-Cola bottles from the windowsill, Werner's trophies from his crisis of faith. Now they seemed obscene. 12 glass monuments to willful ignorance. Werner picked up one bottle, turned it in the lamplight. "I'm not going back," he said quietly. Klaus looked up. "When they repatriate us, when the war ends, I'm requesting asylum." Werner set the bottle down. "I'd rather die in America than rebuild that." Rolf nodded slowly. "They'll call us traitors. We already are." Klaus stood, walked to the window. Beyond the barbed wire, American guards smoked cigarettes under the overhang, trying to stay dry. One of them waved. Klaus lifted his hand automatically. "I betrayed every value I thought I stood for the moment I put on the uniform," Klaus continued. "I just didn't know it until Sergeant Williams handed me that butter pat and treated me like a human being." The rain turned to sleet, pinged off the metal roof like spent shell casings. Klaus Behrens stayed in Mississippi after the war, opened a bakery in 1947, put extra butter in everything. Challah, croissants, dinner rolls. Never charged American GIs less than what the bread cost, but always gave them an extra roll. Always. Werner Todt became a Coca-Cola distributor in Hamburg, kept his 12 empty bottles from Camp Alva on his office shelf for 40 years. When people asked about them, he told them the truth. Every time. Rolf Niedermeyer tried teaching baseball to German children in the 1950s. It never caught on. He coached anyway, wearing the same POW glove Sergeant Kowalski had given him, teaching kids that some games don't require victory, just participation. Lena Hartwig returned to Stuttgart, became an optometrist. Never charged American soldiers stationed in her town. When they insisted on paying, she told them someone had once given her the gift of sight when they had every reason not to. She was just passing it forward. The butter melted. The Coca-Cola evaporated. The baseball glove cracked with age. The prescription glasses were replaced with newer models. But the men who'd been defeated by kindness never forgot. They'd learned too late that the real propaganda wasn't what they'd been told about the enemy. It was what they'd been told about themselves.